talking earlier about, in my documents, I always recommend that we permit the trustee or the executor to receive a fee. It's not that they must take one, but I want them to treat it as a job, and I want them to do a good job, and they ought to be paid, especially if they've got another job, or, you know, it's a fairly thankless job generally. Is that how, I've got a great little article about why a corporate trustee. I don't work for a corporation, but there's a lot of good reasons to use an impartial third-party corporate trustee. I'd say 90+% of my documents, I have individual 1, individual 2, and I generally do not recommend, and if it's your own documents, do what you want, if you and your wife, but I strongly discourage my clients from picking a sibling or somebody else that is over 72. If I can't know that I'm going to get 5 or 7 years of service, of potential service, I don't want them nominated in my document. It's a burden. If I'm 83, the last thing I want to be doing is counting up money to give it to my brother's kids. That's just not what I want to be doing at 83.
Okay, if you have 2 kids, and you recommend him making both of them?
You can. We had this question before, but you're not conferring a joy on somebody. Presumably they're both going to get the same economic equal value.
Right.
So do you really want them both to be burdened with the process? And it depends. I've got a doctor's son that's great with doing the healthcare power of attorney, and then I've got my accountant daughter that's better to do the money stuff. So you've got to look realistically. I generally don't like to put anybody in my documents that is, if I can't get 5 years of service, I don't want them. So that starts to about 72, 74. I try to check my clients down saying, are you sure? It's not to say you're not able to tend to your own stuff, but you're talking about handling somebody else's stuff. I also am a big fan of not putting our kids in our documents for medical until they're 30, at least. Because I personally wouldn't want to be in a spot where I had to pull the plug for mom and dad and live with that for the next 50, 60 years. That's just a heavy burden. But every family's different. I've had the privilege over the years of working with a lot of different families, both parts of the country and ethnicity. We generally, as Americans, don't put that much on our kids. They tend to have a fairly cushy existence. Go back 50 years. I mean, I grew up on a dairy farm. I was milking cows. I didn't do this North Shore sports stuff after school. I was working. That's not saying that's what everybody needs to do, but we tend to not permit, everybody's different. So you've got to be realistic with who you're asking. Does that answer that question? Questions over here? Yes, please.
At the death of the second spouse,
Yes.
if you want to set up a family foundation or donate to university with a percentage of the total.
Oh, that's a great question.
Tell me what your thoughts are on that.
Sure, great question. So the question is, when we're making our charitable distributions, how do we do that? How does the percentage work, and what's the best format? You almost reverse engineer it. So if you think about that charity, and I find it easier just to create a hypothetical. So pretend, sorry dear, I survived my wife, and I've got, my estate has $2 million in it. And I wanted to leave, I went to Chicago, Ken. I'm a very big fan of music, so I'm involved in Ravinia and the Genesee Theater. So I want to leave out of my $2 million, $50,000 to the Genesee Theater. If I leave $50,000 to my Genesee Theater, but my $2 million may go up a little bit, may go down a little bit. I don't really know what that is. If I left 2%, okay, that's 40,000. That's pretty close. So 2.5% of my wealth. So if I left upon my death, I leave 2.5% to the Genesee Theater, and the remainder among my 3 other kids. I've effectively made that charity a remainder beneficiary. By making them a remainder beneficiary, they have a right to a full accounting. They have a right to all the information, just like a shareholder. How would you know what 2 or 3% of $2 million is? You need to know the gross amount, the net amount, and now you know how to calculate it. It's only fair. How would you know what 2% of that net amount is? So my recommendation is be appropriate. If I wanted to leave 50% of my wealth, out of the $2 million, my 3 kids get $1 million, and $1 million goes to the Genesee Theater. Sure, 50% to the Genesee and 50% per Sturpey's to the Rhodes kids. Fine with that, I'll deal with the headaches. If it's a small sliver, I would much rather say a dollar amount. I leave 25K, I leave 50K. Is it going to be exactly 2.5%? No, but I'd rather free up the executor that is on that island of burden from having another remainder beneficiary, almost like a shareholder in a corporation.
So it's better the dollar amount then?
So it depends on the magnitude and everything else.
What if you want to set up a family foundation in addition to setting
So-
up a university? Let's say you want to give $4 million to the university,
Right.
and the remainder that you want to set up is to a family foundation, and you decide how you want to do that.
Great. Well, so you answered the question for the gentleman right behind you. What do I do to not pay income tax on my IRA? Give it to the charity, give it to a foundation, give it to a donor advised fund. You're like, but I got kids and I kind of like them most
Forget
days. So these are decisions we have to make. But so I've been doing this 23 years. I did a couple foundations the first couple years that I started. Donor advised funds have effectively eliminated 95% of foundations. You picked a big number, $4 million.
Well, I mean, we're talking.
If you're talking a bigger number, then foundations might make sense, but you're also, it's almost like having a retirement account. You're basically a non-for-profit corporation that has to file a 990, that has all this corporate compliance, that has to be regulated by the government. The donor advised funds are sort of turnkey.
Is there a dollar amount limit on this?
Most of the practitioners will say 2 million and up, but again, I want to know, what are we accomplishing with the foundation, and using a foundation as our vehicle that we could not accomplish using a donor advised fund.
Well, if you want to stipulate as to the foundation, that would be then donating to other charities.
You can pass through. That's what the whole idea of a donor advised fund is. It must go to another 501c.
Okay.
So you can flow it through.
So you can
The
do it
typical
through a
reason that, and I've got some great pieces. If you send me an email, I can flip you some stuff. They're not mine. As you can see, I share other people's stuff. I don't do a ton of public speaking. I just, John, you asked me, so I was happy to do it. But basically, unless you're doing what we call a supporting organization, you're out there and you're actually doing something directly, typically a donor advised fund is the way to go. And you can typically even use a donor advised fund piggybacked with another active organization and feed it through there. So you've got to understand that fully, and you've got to understand why that doesn't accomplish what you want, and then you could go to a private foundation or something.
That's really thoughtful, great question. But are you talking only Illinois in this, or is this?
So that's a federal. So
That's
the
a
whole
federal.
concept of the 501c is the code section of the IRS.
I mean, I understand that.
And then you have to be regulated and approved as a not-for-profit here in the state of
Right,
Illinois.
okay.
But donor advised funds is a national plan. It's the easiest way to do giving. And before we went 2x on the income tax side for our exemptions, you could do these charitable donations to a donor advised fund, and I had lots of clients that would build up this donor advised fund, so when they were in their best term I've ever heard is a victory lap. So after you kind of do your work and you have your transition time, then you're enjoying your victory lap, and during that time you've got this charitable war chest to do whatever good things you want to do. Good question.
It does, but then does that also, I think I'm talking apples and oranges here, but if in my will or my trust, I designate, and you say percentage, and I like that better than a dollar amount, to my alumni, my my alma mater.
Sure.
That's not the same thing. That's
So,
just,
so that's a,
bequest.
that's going directly to the, and I've done a bunch of those, and the organizations, I've done them to DePaul, I've done them to St. Jude, a lot of different places. You can typically coordinate with them and do a scholarship or otherwise set stuff up so they can dole it out towards your intentions. They welcome your contribution.